Hey everyone, I've noticed that many of you are enjoying the videos, but most of you haven't subscribed yet. We're super close to hitting 1,000 subscribers, and your support could help us reach that milestone. If you're enjoying the content, please hit that subscribe button and give this video a like. It really makes a huge difference and helps us keep creating more awesome content. Thank you so much for watching and supporting. I came home to a quiet house. Too quiet. Usually Jessica's voice would fill the space, her laughter echoing from the kitchen or living room, but today the silence was suffocating. I tossed my keys onto the console and called out, "Jess?" Nothing. Just the low hum of the refrigerator, a sound I'd never noticed until now. As I moved deeper into the house, something caught my eye. The faint glow of Jessica's phone on the kitchen counter. Unlocked. That was odd. Jessica was meticulous with her devices. She always kept her phone close, locked, and often turned screen down whenever I was around. My pulse quickened, curiosity tightening its grip on me. I hesitated, but the screen dimmed as if taunting me. I picked it up, my hand trembling slightly. A string of messages from a contact saved as business filled the screen. But these weren't business texts. The words were curt, almost coded, yet laced with a familiarity that made my stomach churn. "Can't wait for next time. When he's not around. You look stunning today." What the hell? I stood there frozen. My mind buzzed, a static roar drowning out everything else. I read and reread those messages, each word gnawing at me like a parasite burrowing into my thoughts. It couldn't be what I was thinking. No, Jessica was loyal, loving, or at least she used to be. The phone slipped from my fingers, clattering onto the counter. The sound broke through the fog, clouding my mind. Panic surged. I grabbed the phone and quickly shut it off, placing it exactly as I'd found it. My heart hammered in my chest as if I'd just run a marathon. What was I doing? Snooping? I'd never crossed that line before. I took a deep breath, willing myself to calm down. She walked in just then, her heels clicking on the tile floor. "Hey," she greeted me, a smile plastered on her face. Too wide, too bright. "You're home early." I forced a smile in return. "Yeah, things wrapped up faster than I expected." I watched her closely, searching for something, anything. But she moved with the same practiced ease as always. She placed a small shopping bag on the counter, something expensive, no doubt, and leaned in to kiss me. I hesitated, just for a fraction of a second before returning the kiss. It felt hollow, like a performance for an audience of one, me. "Everything okay?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. Her voice was light, but there was something underneath, something I hadn't noticed before. I couldn't put my finger on it, but the suspicion planted earlier was beginning to sprout roots. "Yeah, of course," I lied. "Just tired." Jessica's gaze lingered on me for a moment longer than usual before she turned away, humming to herself as she began unpacking the bag. I stood there, observing her every move, the way she carefully placed each item in its designated spot, the way she tossed her hair back, a faint whiff of unfamiliar cologne wafting through the air. My pulse spiked again. It wasn't mine. I tried to shake it off. I was overthinking. But the seed of doubt had been sown, and it was spreading like a poison through my veins. I couldn't unsee those messages, couldn't ignore the nagging thought that maybe, just maybe, something was terribly wrong. The next few days were unbearable. Every time Jessica left for work, every time she checked her phone and smiled at the screen, my gut twisted into tighter knots. I noticed little things I'd overlooked before, the way she'd take longer to get ready, the sudden flurry of new clothes in her wardrobe, the late nights with vague explanations. I felt like I was being suffocated by my own paranoia. Was I imagining all of this? Was I losing my mind? One evening, she came home with a box of chocolates. My favorite. She handed it to me with a coy smile, as if she was giving me a peace offering. "For you," she said softly. "Why?" I asked, immediately regretting the sharpness in my tone. Her smile faltered. "Because I love you, Tom," she replied, but there was an edge to her voice, a warning. "Why do I need a reason to buy my husband chocolates? Guilt slammed into me. I was being ridiculous, jumping at shadows. I needed to trust her. I'd always trusted her. But trust was fragile, and those messages had shattered something fundamental. I forced a laugh and took the box, murmuring a thanks. But the sweetness of the chocolate turned bitter on my tongue as I chewed. The taste of deceit. Days turned into weeks, each one blending into the next. I started to doubt my own sanity, second-guessing everything I thought I knew. The house felt colder, emptier, like a stranger's home I was trespassing in. Even my own presence seemed intrusive, as if I no longer belonged. Every time I looked at Jessica, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was staring at someone I didn't recognize. One night we were sitting together on the couch. Jessica was scrolling through her phone, the glow of the screen casting eerie shadows across her face. I watched her from the corner of my eye, pretending to focus on the muted TV. She laughed softly at something, a private smile touching her lips. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. "What's so funny?" I asked casually, though my voice came out strained. "Just something from work," she replied, not bothering to look up. The lie rolled off her tongue so effortlessly that it sent a chill down my spine. I nodded, saying nothing more. But in that moment, something shifted. It wasn't a question of whether I was imagining things anymore. No, I was certain something was very, very wrong. The unease gnawing at me had transformed into a dark certainty. She was hiding something, and I needed to know what. The next day, I left work early and came home. I moved quickly, checking her drawers, her closet, her nightstand. Everything seemed in order, perfectly arranged. But that, in itself, was suspicious. Jessica was many things, but neat wasn't one of them. Her closet was usually a mess of clothes, bags, and shoes scattered everywhere. Now it looked staged, almost sterile. I opened her nightstand drawer and rifled through it, my fingers brushing against a piece of paper tucked beneath a book. I pulled it out, a receipt from an expensive restaurant downtown, dated 2 weeks ago. Dinner for two. My blood ran cold. Jessica had told me she was working late that night. I stared at the receipt, my hand trembling. The ink blurred as my eyes welled up. How long had this been going on? How long had she been lying to my face, sleeping beside me, pretending that everything was fine? I shoved the receipt back into the drawer and slammed it shut. The sound echoed through the empty house, bouncing off the walls like a derisive laugh. My pulse thundered in my ears, each beat a reminder of my own stupidity. I'd been blind, so goddamn blind. When Jessica came home that evening, I forced myself to act normal, to smile and make small talk. But every word, every gesture felt hollow. I was coiled tight, every nerve on edge, waiting for her to slip up. But she didn't. She floated through the evening, her laughter light, her smile bright, everything perfectly in place. By the time she fell asleep beside me, I was wide awake, staring at the ceiling. I was done wondering, done doubting. Something was wrong and I was going to find out what. No more pretending, no more playing the fool. This wasn't a game I was going to lose. The next morning after Jessica left for work, I decided to stop pretending. I couldn't spend another day teetering on the edge of sanity, questioning my own perception of reality. The lies and deceit were like weights strapped to my chest, pulling me deeper into darkness. I needed answers, no matter how ugly they turned out to be. I waited a full hour, making sure she was at the office before heading straight to our home office, a place we hardly used anymore. The desk was cluttered with bills, old magazines, and Jessica's notebooks. It took me a while to find what I was looking for, our shared financial records. I scanned through page after page of bank statements, credit card transactions, and bills, my eyes searching for anomalies. It wasn't long before I noticed them: large withdrawals, sporadic transfers to an unfamiliar account, and payments I hadn't authorized, all of them made within the last 3 months. My fingers tightened around the edge of the papers, crumpling them as the reality sank in. Jessica had been siphoning money from our accounts into one under her name, quietly, methodically. A bitter smile twisted my lips. She was planning her escape, and I'd been too blinded by love and trust to see it. I took a deep breath, my mind racing. How deep did this go? I clicked open my laptop, accessing our online banking. With each click, more evidence piled up, confirming my worst suspicions. She'd set up a new checking account under her maiden name, a name she hadn't used since we got married. But that wasn't the worst part. No, the worst part was seeing the transactions linked to it. Lavish dinners at high-end restaurants, jewelry stores, hotel reservations, all while I was sitting at home, unaware, playing the role of the devoted husband. My hands shook as I copied the details, taking screenshots and printing out everything. There was no going back now. I wasn't the type to let things slide or walk away without a fight. She thought she could play me for a fool, but if she wanted a game, I'd give her one she'd never forget. I needed more. Just knowing she was cheating wasn't enough. I had to see it, feel it, let the betrayal burn deep enough to cauterize every last feeling I had for her. That night, as we sat across from each other at dinner, I watched her, really watched her, the way her eyes darted to her phone every few seconds, the subtle smile that would flicker across her lips when she read a message. "Work keeping you busy?" I asked casually, cutting into my steak. My voice was steady, almost too steady. "Yeah, it's been non-stop," she replied without looking up, already scrolling through something else. "It's just crazy right now." "Must be," I murmured, "since you've been getting home so late." Her gaze snapped up to meet mine, a flicker of something, fear, maybe, crossing her face. It was gone in an instant, replaced by that practiced smile I'd grown to hate. "You know how it is," she said sweetly. "Big project deadlines and all." I nodded, letting the silence stretch out until it became uncomfortable. Finally, she shifted in her seat, glancing away. I fought the urge to throw my fork across the room, the rage bubbling just beneath the surface. Instead, I smiled and finished my meal, all the while plotting my next move. The following week, I started following her. It felt wrong, an invasion of privacy, a line I'd sworn I'd never cross. But that line had been obliterated the moment I found those messages. I needed to see where she went when she wasn't working late or attending those so-called business meetings. I left the office early one evening, my heart pounding in my chest as I tailed her car through the city. She was a careful driver, taking turns smoothly, checking her mirrors often. It almost seemed like she was looking for something, or someone. The thought made my skin crawl. I kept a safe distance, watching as she pulled into the underground parking lot of a downtown hotel. My breath caught. I knew this place. It was one of those luxury hotels where the city's elite came to indulge in discreet liaisons. My fingers clenched the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. I parked on the street and watched her through my side mirror. She stepped out of the car, smoothing down her dress, a dress I'd never seen before, and glanced around almost nervously. Then a man emerged from the elevator and waved. Tall, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit. Jessica's face lit up with a smile I hadn't seen in months. She walked over to him, her steps quickening, and without a word she kissed him. The world around me blurred. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut, the pain sharp and suffocating. Every instinct screamed at me to get out of the car, to confront them, to demand answers. But I forced myself to stay put, to watch as she clung to him, laughing softly at something he whispered in her ear. It wasn't just physical. There was something deeper, something I hadn't felt from her in years. The realization that she had given this man everything she'd withheld from me, her affection, her laughter, her love, made something snap inside me. I fumbled for my phone and took a series of pictures. The flash turned off, each click feeling like a knife twisting deeper into my chest. I snapped shots of them walking hand in hand into the hotel lobby, of her leaning against him, of the way his hand rested possessively on the small of her back. She looked radiant, glowing even. It made me sick. I stayed in the car long after they disappeared inside. Minutes passed, then hours. I should have driven home, should have left this sordid mess behind me. But I couldn't move, couldn't think beyond the anger, the hurt, the need for retribution burning through me. When Jessica finally left the hotel, it was past midnight. She looked slightly disheveled, her lipstick smudged, hair a little out of place, but there was a satisfaction in her expression, a smugness that made me want to scream. I followed her back home, keeping my distance. She didn't notice, too wrapped up in whatever afterglow she was basking in. When she slipped into bed beside me that night, I pretended to be asleep, my back turned to her. I felt her hand on my shoulder, a gentle squeeze, like she was reassuring herself of my presence. "I love you," she whispered, her voice soft in the darkness. My eyes stayed shut, my body rigid. I wanted to grab her, to shake her until she admitted everything, but that would be too easy, too clean. No, I needed to hurt her the way she'd hurt me, slowly, deeply, irrevocably. Over the next few days, I started piecing together more details. I combed through our finances, tracing every transaction linked to her secret account. It was worse than I thought. Jessica had siphoned off thousands of dollars into that account, probably preparing for a life without me. There were purchases for luxury items I'd never seen, wire transfers to her lover's name, and, this one stung the most, a down payment on a penthouse suite at the very hotel I'd seen them at. The rage inside me was like a living thing, gnawing at my insides, demanding release. I smashed a glass in my hand one evening, the shards cutting deep, blood trickling down my fingers. But even that pain felt numb compared to what she'd done, compared to the betrayal that was eating me alive. I took more pictures, more notes, gathering every shred of evidence I could find. I documented her lies, her whereabouts, her secret expenses. With each discovery, I felt myself growing colder, more detached. The love I'd once felt for her shriveled up, replaced by a burning need to destroy everything she valued. Confronting her now would be pointless. She'd deny, deflect, twist the narrative until I was the crazy paranoid husband. No, I had to be smarter, more precise. I'd strike when she least expected it, when she thought she'd won. One evening I received a call from our bank. The manager wanted to confirm a transfer I hadn't authorized. Jessica had attempted to move another large sum into her private account. My jaw clenched so hard I thought my teeth might crack. "Cancel it," I said through gritted teeth, my voice barely controlled, "and put a freeze on all joint accounts." Immediately, as the manager complied, I imagined her confusion when she tried to access the money later, how she'd react when she found the funds gone. A small, cruel smile spread across my lips. This was just the beginning. Jessica had taken everything from me, my trust, my love, my security. Now it was my turn to take everything from her. I'd strip her of every safety net, every comfort she'd built for herself. By the time I was done, she wouldn't just be alone, she'd be ruined. I spent the next few days retreating into myself. The shock and anger still simmered beneath the surface, but I forced myself to bury those emotions. They wouldn't help me now. What I needed was clarity, a plan that was meticulous, precise, and most importantly, devastating. The first step was control, control of myself and control of our finances. I couldn't afford any rash decisions, not now. So I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and started compartmentalizing every aspect of our lives. I wrote down everything I knew about Jessica's routine, our shared expenses, and the financial landscape we'd built together. Piece by piece, I dismantled the life we'd shared, transforming it into something sterile and devoid of any emotional connection. I stopped reacting to Jessica's comments, her smiles, or her attempts to make small talk. Instead, I watched and listened. I let her think that I'd moved past my suspicions, that I was just the same reliable husband who'd been bending over backward for her all these years. But every time she laughed at her phone or came home smelling like his cologne, I added another note to my mental ledger. My plan began with ensuring that I was financially insulated from whatever fallout might come. I called up an old college friend, Rick, a lawyer who owed me a favor or two. He listened quietly as I laid out the situation, never once interrupting, his silence thick with tension. When I finished, he took a long, deliberate breath. "Tom, you need to be careful," he warned. "You're walking a tightrope here. If she catches wind of what you're doing, She could file for divorce first and take half of everything. Don't worry, I replied, my voice steady. She thinks she's in control. She won't see it coming. Rick sighed, then shifted into professional mode. Okay, I'll help you set up a separate account. Don't shift your personal assets and make sure everything you have is legally protected. But remember, one misstep and she'll fight you tooth and nail. She wouldn't get the chance. I moved quickly, opening a personal account in my name only and transferring every asset that could be tied to me, savings, investments, anything liquid. All our shared accounts, I meticulously drained and reallocated, leaving just enough to keep up appearances. Rick drafted the paperwork quietly, his questions short and to the point. Never once prying into why I was doing this. He didn't have to. He'd known me long enough to understand when I'd made up my mind. With the financial groundwork set, I turned my attention back to Jessica. I didn't want to just take what she valued. I wanted to leave her with nothing. The first step was liquidating everything she thought she had control over. We'd invested in a few properties over the years, and they were all in my name. Jessica, in her arrogance, hadn't bothered to check or secure her position in any of them. I reached out to our realtor, informing her that I was looking to sell quietly. I made sure there'd be no paper trail for Jessica to stumble upon. The realtor, sensing something off, hesitated but ultimately agreed. Cash flow was cash flow, and I knew how to make it worth her while. The next phase was our accounts, those Jessica hadn't drained already. I took my time combing through them, itemizing every purchase she'd made in the past few months. For each questionable withdrawal or suspicious transaction, I marked it down and sent Rick the documentation. It would all come back to haunt her soon enough. When he sent me back the finalized divorce papers, I almost laughed at the irony. Here she was living a life of luxury while I was erasing any financial stability she thought she had. But then the unexpected happened. One evening, as I sat at the kitchen table, staring blankly at the divorce papers, Jessica came home in a whirlwind of energy. She was wearing a new dress, a shimmering, expensive-looking piece I knew she hadn't bought with our shared money. I tensed, bracing myself for the usual song and dance. But this time there was something different about her. She was glowing with an excitement that made my stomach clench. "Tom, I need to talk to you," she announced, her voice bubbling with anticipation. I know this might come as a shock, but I've made a decision. She took a deep breath, and I watched her, my expression carefully blank. Here it comes, I thought. She's going to tell me she's leaving, that she's found someone else. I waited, willing myself not to react. "I'm leaving you," she blurted out, the words tumbling from her lips in a rush. She smiled like she was proud of herself for finally saying it. "I know this seems sudden, but I've met someone. He's everything I've ever wanted, and I don't want to hide it anymore." The silence that followed was almost suffocating. I nodded slowly as if considering her words. "So you've made up your mind?" I asked, keeping my voice calm and measured. "Yes, I have." Jessica straightened her shoulders, relief washing over her face. "And before you say anything, I'm not worried about the money. My new man, let's just say he's more than capable of taking care of me." I let out a low hum, tapping the edge of the divorce papers on the table. "That's good to know," I murmured. "You won't need to worry about our joint accounts then, will you?" Her smile faltered just a fraction. "What do you mean?" I pushed the papers across the table toward her. "These are for you," I said softly. "I've been doing some thinking too, and I've come to the same conclusion. It's over." Jessica stared down at the documents, her eyes narrowing as she skimmed through them. "What? What is this?" "It's a divorce agreement. I'm offering you a clean break," I explained. "No drama, no dragging this out in court. You can have your freedom." I leaned back, letting her absorb the shock. "Of course, there's nothing left for you to take, since I've already emptied our accounts and transferred everything I own to a personal account." Her face drained of color. "You what?" The devastation that flickered across her face was almost satisfying. I let the silence linger, watching as she struggled to comprehend what I just said. Her mouth opened and closed, her eyes darting across the pages, searching for something, anything, that might give her an advantage. You, you can't do that, she stammered. Those are our accounts. You can't just take everything, I shrugged. Actually, I can. You see, it's all in the fine print. I tapped the papers lightly, my smile widening. You might want to read them more carefully before signing. Jessica's expression twisted into a mask of fury. She shoved the papers away, standing up so abruptly that her chair toppled over. You son of a... I held up a hand, cutting her off. I'm just doing what's best for both of us. You said it yourself. You have someone else now, someone better, right? So why fight over what's left? For a moment, I thought she might actually attack me. Her chest heaved, and her eyes blazed with a hatred I'd never seen before. But then, just as quickly, the fight drained out of her. She sank back into her seat, staring blankly at the papers. You planned this, she whispered, her voice hollow. You knew I was leaving, and you took everything. Think of it as a head start on your new life, I replied smoothly. Now you're free to be with him, no tastes, no messy legal battles. Isn't that what you wanted? Jessica's gaze sharpened, and I saw the calculation in her eyes, the wheels turning as she tried to find a way out. But I'd made sure there wasn't one. Everything was airtight. She could fight, but she'd lose. And deep down, I think she knew it. Finally, she stood, smoothing down her dress with trembling hands. Fine, she spat. I don't need your money. I don't need anything from you. Good, I said quietly. I wish you the best, Jessica. She stormed out of the house, slamming the door so hard the walls shook. I sat there for a long time, staring at the empty doorway, my heart racing with a mix of triumph and something else, something I couldn't quite name. I'd done it. I'd taken everything she thought she had and left her with nothing but her pride. But as the adrenaline faded, a strange emptiness settled in my chest. Was this victory? Was this what I'd been fighting for? The next few days passed in a blur. Jessica didn't come back. She didn't call. And I continued executing my plan, moving money, selling properties, locking down every loose end. With each step, I felt the walls closing in tighter around me, suffocating the anger and hurt that had fueled me for so long. When I finally received the notification that the divorce papers had been filed and signed, I felt a strange pang of loss. Jessica had taken the deal, walked away without a fight, a clean break, just as I'd wanted. Or had I? I stared at the document, her signature scrawled at the bottom, and realized something I hadn't before. I'd been so focused on revenge, on making her pay. As soon as Jessica moved out, I went into overdrive. The moment her car disappeared down the street, I methodically drained the remainder of our joint accounts. Every penny flowed into my personal, legally insulated holdings. There would be no messy divorce settlements for her to pick apart, no hidden cashes to claw back. She hadn't even realized what she'd lost, too focused on her new life with her new lover. I spent the next few hours canceling everything, every utility in her name, every subscription linked to our address cut off in a few clicks. I changed the locks, the security codes, and even the garage door access. I wanted her to feel the weight of each door slamming shut on her former life. By the time I was done, the house felt foreign, sterile, just four walls and a roof, no longer the home we'd shared. I took a slow breath, the air thin with the faint scent of antiseptic and something acrid. Resentment, maybe. Whatever it was, it fueled me through the long hours of erasing Jessica's presence from every aspect of my life. I sat back and reviewed my checklist. The house and car were still mine. The investment properties all liquidated. Jessica's credit cards were shredded and accounts closed. I called each bank, listening with grim satisfaction as the representatives confirmed my request to remove her as a joint holder on everything. Her attempts to access anything would bounce back like a rubber check. She'd find out soon enough when she tried to buy her next pair of designer heels. With each step, a sense of satisfaction grew, but so did the emptiness. I paused, staring at the computer screen as it flickered between confirmation windows. I'd stripped Jessica of everything, left her with a pile of worthless debt she didn't even know she had. And yet, something gnawed at me. Was this enough? It had to be. I closed my eyes, letting the fatigue seep in. Jessica's betrayal ran deep, and it had taken everything in me to keep my calm when she'd announced she was leaving. But that calm was gone now. In its place was a seething pit of need for her to feel the sting of loss as acutely as I had. I stood closing the laptop with a click and walked through the empty rooms. Every piece of furniture, every framed photograph on the wall reminded me of a life that was no longer mine. I turned away from it all and went to the kitchen. I poured myself a drink and sat at the counter, staring at the darkness gathering outside. The doorbell rang. It startled me, a jarring sound that echoed through the quiet house. I put the glass down and crossed to the front door, my heart pounding. Through the peephole, I saw a familiar face, the realtor I'd hired to handle the property sales. I unlocked the door and swung it open, forcing a polite smile. "Beth," I greeted, leaning against the doorframe. "What brings you here this late?" Beth shifted, her smile tight and wary. "Sorry to drop by unannounced, Tom, but I just got word back from a few buyers, and well, I think we need to talk." I motioned her in, my curiosity piqued. She stepped inside, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor as she made her way to the living room. I followed, noting the tension in her posture. Something was off. "What's going on?" I asked, keeping my tone casual. Beth hesitated, fiddling with a folder she held in her hands. "It's about the properties," she said slowly. "A few buyers pulled out at the last minute. In one of the sales, it fell through entirely." I felt a chill run through me. "What do you mean?" She opened the folder and spread out several papers on the coffee table. I recognized them: offer letters, sales agreements, all the documents I'd signed over the past few weeks. But there were red slashes and notes scrawled across them. "It seems there's been some interference," she murmured, tapping a particular note on one of the agreements. "A lien was placed on the property in Miami, and there's another legal hold on the penthouse deal in Chicago." My throat tightened. "A lien? That's impossible. I checked everything. How could a lien be placed?" Beth bit her lip, looking genuinely sympathetic. "It's from Jessica," she said softly. "She must have filed a claim just before the divorce papers were finalized." Rage flared, hot and consuming. "So she thought she could outplay me?" My jaw clenched as I processed the implications. This wasn't just about the money, it was about power, control. She wasn't going to walk away empty-handed after all. I forced myself to breathe, to push down the red haze threatening to cloud my judgment. "Thanks for letting me know, Beth," I said tightly. "I'll handle it." Beth gave me a long look, then nodded. "I'm sorry, Tom. I know this is a mess." She left shortly after, the door closing softly behind her. I stood there for a moment, staring blankly at the stack of ruined deals she'd left on the table. Jessica's name glared at me from the pages, a mocking reminder that I hadn't severed her hold on me as cleanly as I'd thought. I grabbed my phone, dialing Rick's number with a force that nearly cracked the screen. He answered on the second ring, his voice thick with sleep. "Tom, what's going on?" "She filed a fucking lien," I growled, pacing the length of the room. "Jessica. She's sabotaging the property sales." Silence on the other end, then a low curse. "Shit, when did this happen?" "Does it matter?" I snapped. "I want it gone, every trace of her. Erased. Can you do that?" "Calm down, Tom," Rick said, his voice soothing despite the late hour. "I can look into it, but these things take time. If she's filed a legitimate claim—" "She has nothing legitimate," I shouted. My voice echoed, bouncing off the bare walls. "It's a desperate move, Rick. She's trying to claw back something because she knows she's got nothing left." There was a pause, then a sigh. "I'll start working on it first thing in the morning. But Tom, you need to be careful. If you push too hard—" "I know what I'm doing," I cut him off. "Just handle it." I ended the call, my pulse thrumming with a renewed sense of purpose. Jessica thought she could fight back, thought she could sink her claws into what was left of our shared life. But she didn't know who she was dealing with. Not really. I spent the next few days unraveling every legal thread Jessica had tried to weave around my assets. Rick worked tirelessly, filing motions, counterclaims, whatever it took to nullify her last-ditch efforts. I pushed through the exhaustion, barely sleeping as I coordinated with lawyers, realtors, and financial advisors. And then, just as quickly as it had begun, it was over. One by one, the holds on the properties lifted, the buyers returned, their offers intact. The money flowed back into my accounts, a flood that swept away the last remnants of Jessica's influence. I leaned back in my office chair, staring at the final confirmation email with a grim smile. I'd won, completely, utterly won. Jessica had nothing left. No claim to the properties, no access to my finances, not even a foothold in the house we'd once shared. She tried to fight, but I'd bled her dry. I imagined her expression when she realized her final ploy had failed, the look of disbelief, then desperation. A part of me wanted to see it, to watch as she crumbled under the weight of her own hubris. But I knew better. This victory wasn't about seeing her broken. It was about reclaiming control. It was about knowing deep down that I was free. The satisfaction was short-lived, though. That emptiness I'd felt before, the gnawing sensation that something was missing, returned, stronger than ever. I tried to ignore it, tried to drown it in the details of my next move. But it lingered. The fallout came quickly. Jessica's calls started the day after the last property closed. Voicemails filled with fury and bitterness, accusations and threats. I listened to the first few, then blocked her number. She tried emailing long, ranting messages that went straight to the trash. She even showed up at the office once, security dragging her away as she screamed obscenities in the lobby. I stayed calm through it all, a stone wall against her flailing desperation. I'd expected this. I'd prepared for it. She was losing and she knew it. But her final collapse, that was something I couldn't have anticipated. 2 weeks after the last deal closed, I came home to find her waiting on the front steps. Jessica sat on the front steps, looking like a ghost of the woman she used to be. Her hair was a mess, her eyes sunken and rimmed with red. The defiance, the arrogance she'd flaunted so freely, gone. All that remained was desperation, clinging to her like a second skin. For a moment, I considered turning around and leaving, just driving away, letting her sit there until she finally gave up and vanished from my life for good. But that wasn't how this story would end, not with her sitting on my doorstep, forcing me to confront the wreckage we'd made of each other. I stepped out of the car, locking it with a soft beep that echoed in the quiet evening. Her head snapped up, eyes widening as she scrambled to her feet. "Tom," her voice was a ragged whisper, strained and hoarse. "Please, I need to talk to you." I didn't respond. I walked past her, the sound of my footsteps on the stone path the only acknowledgement I gave. My hand rested on the door handle, and I heard the faint hitch of her breath, the sharp inhale of someone teetering on the edge. "Please," she cried, lunging forward. Her fingers clutched at my arm, shaking with a frantic energy that radiated off her in waves. "Tom, please." I have nowhere else to go." I turned slowly, meeting her gaze with a cool, unblinking stare. "I thought your new man was supposed to take care of you, Jessica. What happened?" Her face crumpled. He left me," she whispered, the words tumbling out in a rush of humiliation and disbelief. "He found someone else. I didn't see it coming." I almost laughed at the irony. Jessica, the schemer, the one always a step ahead, blindsided by the same betrayal she'd inflicted on me. The universe, it seemed, had a sense of poetic justice. "So," I said, shrugging off her grip. "Why are you here?" She flinched like I'd slapped her. Her lips trembled, and she took a shaky step back. I thought we could talk. Maybe try again." The audacity left me speechless for a moment. She stood there, her makeup smeared, mascara streaking down her cheeks like black tears. She looked pathetic, broken, and for the first time I felt something close to pity stir inside me. but it wasn't enough to erase the damage she'd done. There's nothing left to talk about, I said flatly. You made your choice. Tom, I was wrong, she choked out, her voice splintering. I know that now. He promised me everything and I thought, she trailed off, shaking her head as if trying to banish the memory. I thought I deserved better, but I was wrong. He used me, and now She stopped, a sob cutting off her words. I crossed my arms, leaning against the door. You thought you deserved better? I repeated slowly. Is that why you drained our accounts? Why you tried to put liens on properties that were never yours? She winced, her gaze dropping to the ground. I, I thought if I left with something, it would be easier. That I wouldn't feel so, she struggled for the right word, finally settling on, empty. I shook my head, incredulous. You thought ruining me would make you feel better? No, she burst out, her hands flying up in a pleading gesture. I wasn't trying to ruin you, Tom. I just, I didn't know what else to do. And when you cut me off, I had no way to pay for your lifestyle, I finished for her. No man to bankroll your shopping sprees, your penthouses, your goddamn designer bags. Her eyes flared with a flash of something, pride, anger, I couldn't tell. I'm not a gold digger, she hissed. You know I'm not. Really? I pushed off the door, stepping closer. Then why are you here? Why didn't you go find some other guy to sponge off of? Jessica's jaw tightened, but she didn't look away. Because I love you, she said softly. A sharp, bitter laugh escaped me before I could stop it. Love me? I repeated, shaking my head. You don't know what love is, Jessica. You love the comfort, the security. But me? You threw me away the moment something shinier came along. No, she surged forward, her hands gripping my shirt. I was stupid, okay? I thought he'd give me everything I wanted, but I realized it was you. It was always you, Tom. Please, just give me a chance to make things right. I stared down at her, her words washing over me like a cold wave. The sincerity in her eyes, the tears streaking down her face, it almost made me believe her. Almost. But then I remembered the lies, the manipulation, the betrayal that had ripped through my life like a hurricane. I pried her hands off me, stepping back until there was a chasm between us. You don't get it, do you, I said quietly. It's not about what you want anymore. It's not even about what I want. Then what? She whispered, a tremor in her voice. It's about freedom, I said simply. You're free to go, to do whatever the hell you want, but I'm free too. Free of you, Jessica shook her head frantically. No, 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 you can't mean that. We can fix this, Tom. I can fix this. Just tell me what to do, please. Do, I repeated, a strange calm settling over me. I reached into my pocket, pulling out a folded piece of paper, the final bank statement. I handed it to her, watching as she unfolded it with shaking hands. Her eyes widened as she scanned the page, realization dawning slowly. The numbers were stark, unforgiving, the zero balance staring back at her. No, she whispered, the word barely audible. No, this can't be right. It's right, I said softly. Every account, every card, every penny you thought you had left, gone. Her gaze snapped up to mine, wild and desperate. You did this, she breathed, horror and disbelief mingling in her expression. You took everything. You took everything from me first, I said evenly. My trust, my peace, my life. I'm just returning the favor. She staggered back, the paper fluttering to the ground. Tom, please, I don't have anywhere to go. I have nothing. And whose fault is that? I asked coldly. You made your bed, Jessica. Now you get to lie in it. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. The fight drained out of her, her shoulders slumping in defeat. I'm sorry, she whispered, the words falling like ashes between us. Sorry doesn't change anything, I murmured. It's too late for that. Silence stretched, heavy and oppressive. Jessica stood there, broken and hollow, a shadow of the woman she'd once been. I felt Nothing, no satisfaction, no victory, just a hollow emptiness that matched hers. I turned away, my hand resting on the doorknob. Goodbye, Jessica. Wait, she cried, lunging forward one last time. Tom, please. I slammed the door in her face, the sound echoing through the empty house like a gunshot. I stood there, breathing hard, my heart hammering in my chest. Through the wood, I heard her sobs, muffled and broken. But I didn't open the door. I didn't let her back in. Minutes passed. Slowly the sobs faded, replaced by silence. I waited until I heard the sound of her footsteps retreating down the path, until the faint roar of an engine signaled her departure. Only then did I turn around, sliding down against the door until I was sitting on the floor, staring blankly at the space where she'd stood. My chest ached, but it wasn't from regret or sorrow. It was from something much deeper, something I couldn't quite name. I'd won. I'd taken everything from her, just as she'd taken everything from me. And yet, I still felt empty. Goodbye, I whispered to the empty house, and this time it felt final. I stayed on the floor long after Jessica left, letting the silence seep into me. The house felt emptier than ever. I had stripped it down, erased her from every corner, yet it still echoed with memories of a life I thought I'd wanted. I ran a hand through my hair, then pushed myself up and glanced around the barren living room. Every object that once held meaning was gone, either sold or discarded. Even the walls, now bare, seemed to mock me with their emptiness. But this was necessary, a cleansing. I took a deep breath and made my way upstairs to the bedroom. The large mirror opposite the bed reflected a man I barely recognized. Eyes hollow, face drawn tight with fatigue, and something darker, something that had settled in after months of scheming and retaliating. I opened the closet. 2 suitcases were all that remained. I'd packed my essentials, the few things I hadn't offloaded or sent to storage. The realtor had assured me the house would sell quickly, and when it did, I'd be gone, out of this place and out of this chapter of my life. I zip on the suitcases shut, a sense of finality settling over me. One last night, I thought, glancing at the stripped mattress. One last night in the place that had once been my home. Sleep didn't come easy. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, the events of the past few months replaying in my mind. Every move I'd made, every trap I'd set, every asset I'd stripped away from Jessica's grasp, it all ran through my head in vivid detail. The satisfaction I'd felt at watching her crumble faded, replaced by a lingering, hollow ache. Was it worth it? That question plagued me long after dawn broke. As I made my way down to the kitchen and poured myself a cup of coffee, the realization hit me. I had done it. I'd torn her down, burned everything we'd built together, but in the process I'd torn down a part of myself too. I shook off the thought and focused on the next steps. The realtor was coming by later for a final walkthrough. Once the house sold, I'd disappear, sell off the last of my properties, take whatever I had left, and start over somewhere far away. A clean slate. By the afternoon, I was ready. The realtor took one look at me and raised an eyebrow, but I brushed off her concern. She made small talk, mentioning offers and closing dates, but I barely heard her. My mind was already elsewhere. The papers were signed, and that was that. I handed her the keys and watched as she walked out, leaving me alone in the empty shell of my former life. I took a last look around, then stepped outside, the cool breeze a welcome contrast to the suffocating stillness inside. It was over. The new city felt like a different world. I rented a small apartment overlooking a park, the kind of place where nobody knew your name and everyone kept to themselves. It was exactly what I needed, a place where I could disappear, blend into the background, and leave the past behind. Days bled into weeks, and slowly I settled into a routine. I found a job, something mundane and repetitive, but it kept my mind occupied. I spent my mornings running along the waterfront, afternoons at the office, and evenings reading or watching mindless TV. There were no reminders of Jessica Hiernan, no shared memories waiting to ambush me around every corner. It was quiet, peaceful, but also lonely. One evening, as I sat on the small balcony with a glass of wine, I found myself staring at the empty chair across from me. The sun dipped low, casting long shadows over the park below. Laughter drifted up. Couples, families, people moving on with their lives. It made me think about the life I'd built with Jessica, the plans we'd had, and how all of it had turned to dust. For the first time, I let myself feel it. The loss, the anger, the sadness. I'd been so consumed with revenge, with punishing her, that I hadn't realized how much I'd lost along the way. I'd thought stripping her of everything would make me whole again. But it hadn't. It had only left me more fractured, more empty. I took a long sip of wine, the bitterness lingering on my tongue. Maybe this was the price of closure. Maybe, to truly be free, you had to tear yourself down first. Strip away every vestige of who you were and start anew. Jessica's betrayal had forced me to confront parts of myself I hadn't wanted to see. The insecurity, the need for control, the way I'd let her diminish me without realizing it. I'd let her shape my life, and when she'd walked out, it had felt like a part of me had shattered. But now as I looked out over the city that was slowly becoming mine, I realized something else. I was still standing. Broken maybe, but standing. I set the glass down and took a deep breath. It was time to rebuild, not just my life, but myself. Piece by piece, I would put myself back together. Without her, without the bitterness that had fueled me for so long. A few months passed, I sold the last of the properties, moved to a slightly larger place, and even started picking up hobbies I'd abandoned years ago. Photography, cooking. I'd forgotten how much I enjoyed creating something just for the sake of it, without any goal or agenda. One evening I found myself standing on a deserted beach, camera in hand, the roar of the waves a soothing backdrop. I'd come out here on a whim, wanting to capture the sunset, but now that I was here, the camera hung loosely around my neck. Instead, I just watched as the sun dipped below the horizon, the sky painted in hues of gold and crimson. The world seemed to hold its breath, suspended in that fleeting moment between day and night. I felt the tension inside me ease, the lingering shadows of my past receding into the growing dusk. It wasn't forgiveness, not exactly. I wasn't sure I'd ever forgive Jessica for what she'd done, or myself for what I'd become, but it was acceptance. Acceptance that what happened was over, and that I could still shape whatever came next. The tide rolled in, the cold water lapping at my feet, and I took a step forward, letting it soak through my shoes. I felt the sand shift beneath me, unsteady and yielding, but I didn't pull back. I let it surround me, let it ground me. I raised the camera and took a picture of the waves. Not for anyone else, just for me. A reminder that I was here, standing on the edge of something new, something unformed and filled with potential. The sun vanished, leaving a deep indigo sky in its wake. I lowered the camera, the crisp evening air brushing against my face. I felt lighter, as if I'd finally shed the weight that had been pressing down on me for so long. I turned, walking back up the beach, the sound of the surf fading behind me. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long while, that uncertainty didn't scare me. It felt like a promise, an open road stretching out before me, waiting for me to take the first step. I glanced back at the horizon one last time, then headed toward my car. I wasn't running away anymore. I was moving forward, and that made all the difference. Back at the apartment, I sat on the balcony, the city lights twinkling below. I thought about Jessica, wondered where she was, what she was doing. Did she ever think about me, about what we'd had and how it had all gone so wrong? It didn't matter. She was a chapter I'd closed, a lesson learned. I wasn't shackled to her betrayal or my revenge anymore. I raised my glass to the empty chair across from me and smiled. For the first time, I wasn't toasting to a victory or a loss, just to myself, to starting over, to being free. I drained the glass and set it down, leaning back and closing my eyes. Whatever came next, I was ready. The night stretched out before me, vast and open, and I finally felt like I could breathe again.